312,000 fake ballots, $51 million in dirty money, 17 secret calls with extremists, and 60 to humiliating courtroom defeats that turned America's mayor into a national disgrace. Now, live before the entire nation. Jasmine Crockett tears into Rudy Giuliani, once hailed as a hero, now drowning in lies, corruption, and betrayal. When the final mask is ripped away, will America explode or remain silent in the face of truth? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. $787.5 million, the price of a lie. The single largest defamation settlement in U.S. history, paid out to bury a scandal that nearly cracked the foundation of democracy. 60 to failed lawsuits, each one a desperate attempt to twist reality. Every loss another nail in the coffin of credibility. 21 seconds of silence, the exact pause that hung in the air when even Rudy Giuliani couldn't muster a defense for the fraud he had unleashed. These numbers are not statistics, they are scars. And today, under the blazing lights of Congress, those scars will bleed before the nation. The camera zooms in on Jasmine Crockett. Her gaze is unflinching, her jaw clenched tight, every muscle in her face a portrait of defiance. She doesn't blink as millions watch her live on national television. She knows this moment is bigger than her career, bigger than her party, bigger even than the man sitting across from her. This is about a promise broken to the American people, a promise that truth still matters. Her eyes seem to cut straight through the lens, daring viewers at home not just to watch, but to feel the weight of what's coming. Across the chamber sits Rudy Giuliani, shoulders hunched, tie crooked, sweat glistening under the harsh lights. Once America's mayor, now a man drowning in scandal, debt, and disgrace. He leans forward with a smirk meant to mask his fear, but his hands betray him, twitching, restless, gripping the edge of the desk as if holding on to the last shred of power. To his right, Sean Hannity sits like a smug spectator on a crumbling throne of ratings, his grin sharp, his eyes narrowed. He's not here to witness justice. He's here to see if Crockett will fail. Jasmine doesn't flinch. In front of her is a binder thicker than a brick, stuffed with evidence, wire transfers, sworn testimonies, transcripts of secret calls. Inside is the story of betrayal told in black ink and blood money. She doesn't open it yet. She lets it sit there like a live grenade, the suspense making the air almost unbearable. Giuliani keeps glancing at it, his breathing shallow, his face tightening with every second. He knows what could be inside. He knows one page could destroy what little is left of him. The chair recognizes her, the microphone crackles. And with no hesitation, Jasmine leans in and detonates the silence. $787 million, she begins, her voice sharp, commanding, unrelenting. That's what it cost to silence the truth. That's what it cost to pretend lies were facts. The room stiffens, Hannity's grin falters. Giuliani forces a laugh, but it rings hollow, like glass cracking under pressure. Jasmine continues, each word a bullet. 62 times you walked into a courtroom, 62 times you failed. 62 times the truth crushed you. Gasps ripple through the chamber. Then she stops. She lets the weight of her words hang in the silence. 10 seconds, 15, 21. The same unbearable stillness America once endured, waiting for Giuliani to defend the indefensible. Her eyes burn as she leans closer to the mic. Her whisper cuts sharper than any shout. But what happens when the voice of a community refuses to be silenced? The chamber holds its breath. Outside, protesters roar louder. Inside, Giuliani shifts, his mask of arrogance slipping, his face paling. Hannity leans forward, no longer grinning, sensing the ground shifting beneath him. Jasmine Crockett has thrown the first strike. The nation leans in, on edge, waiting for the explosion to come. Before she was a congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett was a fighter in the trenches of America's forgotten streets. She was the young attorney who stood in overcrowded courtrooms defending black families crushed by a justice system that treated poverty like a crime. She was the woman who faced down landlords evicting single mothers in the dead of winter, who battled school boards that turned their backs on children in South Dallas. While power brokers in Washington traded influence for profit, Jasmine was walking neighborhoods where unemployment ripped families apart, where the cost of insulin meant choosing between medicine or rent, where the American dream had long been pawned for scraps. The media never cared about these stories. Cable networks argue endlessly over ratings wars, while millions of Americans worked to jobs and still went hungry. Talking heads shouted over each other as drug prices soar, as parents rationed pills to keep their children alive. But Jasmine heard the voices that no one televised: the mothers in church basements, the veterans begging the VA for care, the students balancing books in one hand and eviction notices in the other. These were the stories she carried with her like scars, and today, in the blinding lights of Congress, she wielded them like weapons. She was not polished like the career politicians, not softened by cocktail parties and donor dinners. Jasmine was sharp, unfiltered, a voice that refused to bend. That authenticity terrified men like Rudy Giuliani, because he thrived in a world where truth was twisted and packaged. She, on the other hand, came from a place where lies could kill, where one rigged contract meant a neighborhood lost its school, where one corrupt landlord meant dozens of children slept on the floor. Every syllable she spoke today carried the weight of lives lived in the margins, lives Giuliani and his allies would rather erase. And that was why this moment was bigger than her, bigger than any seat in Congress. This was about the people who had been written out of America's script. The single mother holding down to jobs only to lose her health insurance. The warehouse worker laid off by a corporation that shipped jobs overseas while executives cashed million-dollar bonuses. The grandmother who watched her blah crumble under the grip of opioids while politicians smiled for cameras and did nothing. Jasmine carried them all into this chamber like an army without uniforms, their pain distilled into her defiance. Giuliani stared at her, visibly irritated, as if unable to understand how someone without his wealth, his pedigree, his media machine could stand toe-to-toe with him. But Jasmine wasn't standing on pedigree, she was standing on survival. She represented the voices that Hannity never gave airtime to, the communities Giuliani never defended when he chose instead to defend power. In her, the abandoned and overlooked had finally found a weapon sharp enough to strike back. The room thickened with tension, every second pulling tighter, the clash inevitable. America leaned closer to their screens, sensing that this was no longer just politics, it was a collision of two worlds, the empire of deception against a single woman-forged in struggle. And as she fixed her eyes on Giuliani, the unspoken question echoed louder than the gavel: could one woman stand against an empire of deception and force a nation to finally listen? Sean Hannity didn't just sit in that chamber as a spectator. He sat as the architect of an empire built on outrage. For decades, Fox News had been the cathedral of grievance politics, where fear was currency and division was a business model. Hannity wasn't merely a host, he was a kingmaker, a confidant, a nightly megaphone for Donald Trump. Behind the polished desk, beneath the American flag graphics, he cultivated loyalty not with facts, but with fire, telling millions of Americans not what was true, but what they wanted to believe. The empire cracked in 2023. The Dominion voting systems lawsuit ripped open the facade. Nearly $787.5 million paid to settle claims that Fox hosts, including Hannity, spread baseless lies about election fraud. Internal emails exposed the truth. Hannity and his colleagues knew the claims were false, yet they broadcast them anyway. The revelation was damning. The network that claimed to defend democracy had instead profited from poisoning it. And hovering on the horizon was the $2.7 billion Smartmatic lawsuit, threatening to swallow the empire whole. The numbers weren't just financial, they were existential. Viewers who once trusted every word now asked themselves if they had been played for fools. But outside the court filings and newsroom drama, the real America was unraveling. In diners and barbershops, people argue over whether democracy itself could survive. Families stopped speaking at Thanksgiving tables. Neighbors glared at each other across fences, one flying a Trump flag, the other a Biden bumper sticker. Trust in media hit historic lows, with polls showing nearly 70% of Americans believing the press no longer told the truth. Anger wasn't just simmering, it was boiling. To many, Hannity wasn't simply a TV personality. He was the man who whispered into Trump's ear, the shadow strategist shaping the chaos from behind a microphone. Trump and Hannity's relationship blurred the line between journalism and propaganda. Off camera, the two spoke nightly, strategizing responses, crafting narratives, plotting attacks. Hannity was Trump's lifeline when lawsuits closed in, his voice of reassurance when indictments loomed, is public defender when courts expose the fraud. The bond was so tight that critics said Fox News wasn't covering Trump's presidency, it was co-authoring it. And Giuliani, sitting in that hearing now, was the bridge between the two worlds, the failed lawyer who carried Hannity's talking points into courtrooms and Trump's demands into the streets. Jasmine Crockett knew this wasn't just about one man's lies. It was about the machinery that amplified them, the network that sold them, the shadow of a president who thrived on them. The Dominion case had proven one thing: truth could win in court. But would it win in the hearts of Americans who had been fed deception for years? The stakes weren't just Giuliani's career or Hannity's empire. The stakes were whether a nation could still tell fact from fiction, reality from spectacle, democracy from theater. The chamber held its breath as the tension curled tighter. Hannity leaned back, smug but restless, his empire rattled yet unbroken. Giuliani tugged at his collar, a man caught between two masters, the shadow of Trump and the glare of Crockett. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her binder still closed, her voice unspoken but ready to strike. And as the lights bore down, the unrelenting question pressed on every mind. When truth is put on trial, who will the jury believe? The empire of deception, or the voice of the people it tried to silence? The binder finally opened, the thick black covers spread like wings of a predator, and the room inhaled as if bracing for the kill. Jasmine Crockett did not ease into her strike. She tore into it like a blade through fabric. Her hand lifted a stack of documents, the paper trembling not from her grip but from the tension in the air. "Here," she declared, her voice ringing with precision, "or internal Fox News emails, the truth behind the performance." The first page projected onto the chamber screen, and the words were unmistakable. "We know these claims are false, but the audience expects it." Gasps erupted. Giuliani's face paled. Hannity's smirk froze into stone. Jasmine's tone sharpened, every syllable a blow. "This is not journalism. This is fraud with a studio audience." Dominion wasn't just a lawsuit. It was the invoice for betrayal. $787 million. And these emails proved they knew it all along. She let the silence sit heavy, then flung the next set of papers like evidence in a courtroom drama. Here are the hosts, men like Hannity, mocking their own viewers behind closed doors, laughing at the very people who trusted them. Does that sound like freedom of speech to you, Mr. Hannity? The question cut through the air like a scalpel. Hannity shot up in his seat, red-faced, pounding the table. "This is America. Freedom of speech isn't on trial here." His voice boomed across the chamber, but beneath the volume was panic. He needed the words to carry further than the evidence on the screen. "What's next? Will you silence every journalist who asks hard questions?" "This is censorship, plain and simple." His allies on the committee nodded furiously, feeding on the frenzy. That was when Jim Jordan sprang forward, barking over Jasmine like an attacked dog. "This is a sham, a political witch hunt. You want to criminalize opinions because you can't handle the truth." His finger jabbed toward Jasmine, his voice cracking with anger, but the desperation clung to him like sweat. Jasmine didn't blink. Her eyes tracked him with the coldness of someone who had been here before, someone who had faced louder, stronger men and watched them crumble under facts. The room shook again as Marjorie Taylor Greene jumped into the melee, her voice shrill, her fists pounding the desk. "You're nothing but a puppet of the radical left, a liar, a disgrace to Congress." She spat the words like venom, her face red, her body leaning so far over the microphone it seemed she might leap across the chamber. Cameras swung wildly, catching the chaos, the clash, the unraveling of order in real time. The nation watched a circus, but Jasmine was not performing. She was dismantling an empire. She waited, letting them scream, letting the noise fill the chamber until it was unbearable. Then, with surgical calm, she leaned back toward her microphone. "Freedom of speech is sacred," she said, her voice cutting through the uproar like thunder through storm clouds. "But freedom does not include the right to knowingly lie, to poison democracy for profit, to laugh while America burns." Giuliani shifted in his chair, beads of sweat sliding down his temple. Hannity gripped his pen so tightly it snapped in half. The silence that followed was not relief, it was dread. Jasmine locked eyes with the cameras, her voice dropping into a register that trembled with fire. "So let me ask you, is free speech truly a shield for democracy, or has it become a weapon of mass deception aimed straight at the heart of America?" The chamber was already bowling with chaos. Hannity yelling freedom of speech, Jim Jordan barking like a rabid dog, Marjorie Taylor Greene shrieking as though volume could rewrite history. Then the door slammed open with a thunder that froze every sound in the room. Security scattered, cameras pivoted, and a single figure stormed in. Donald J. Trump, red tie swinging, face flushed with fury, shoved past aides and lunged toward the microphone. The air cracked with tension as he seized it with both hands, his voice detonating through the speakers. Jasmine is political trash. A disgrace to America. Nothing but a puppet for the radical left. The chamber erupted, gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs against marble floors. Some Republicans stood to cheer, fists raised, while Democrats shouted order, order, over the din. The camera zoomed tight on Trump's contorted face, veins bulging, spit flying as he raged. For a moment, it wasn't a hearing, it was a rally, a mob, a performance dripping with menace. Giuliani sat frozen, eyes wide, as though even he hadn't expected his old boss to crash through the doors and take command of the battlefield. Jasmine Crockett did not flinch, her binder still lay open before her, evidence spilling like weapons across the desk. She rose slowly, the movement deliberate, commanding the silence one heartbeat at a time. When she spoke, her voice was steady, sharp as steel, carrying further than Trump's roar. "You call me trash," she said, eyes locked on him. "No, Mr. Trump, you're not a president, you're a mafia boss. And this." She held up a page of wire transfers tied to PAC money, shaking it for the cameras. "This is your mob." The words hit like a bomb. The chamber exploded. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras clicked in rapid fire. The crowd outside screamed so loudly, it bled through the walls. On screen, Trump's face flushed deeper, his mouth opening to hurl another insult, but the phrase mafia boss already dominated the chyron scrolling across every news network. Hannity's empire couldn't contain it, Giuliani couldn't deny it, and the image of Crockett standing tall, eyes blazing, reverberated across America. Trump leaned forward, gripping the mic tighter, his voice breaking into a rasp. "This is a witch hunt. I built this country. You wouldn't even be here without me." His fists pounded the table as though foursco, and to the evidence flashing on the screen behind him. Jasmine didn't waver. She leaned closer to her microphone, the chamber hanging on her every syllable. "You didn't build America, you built the cult. And today, the cult meets its reckoning." The audience roared, half in fury, half in awe. Some Republicans shouted for security to remove her, while Democrats thundered back with applause. The camera cut from Trump's furious glare to Jasmine's unyielding stare, the split screen that would define the night. For years, he had dominated the stage with spectacle, with insult, with fear. But today, he had met someone who refused to be cowed. The marble walls trembled with chants echoing from outside. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The hearing was no longer a room. It was a battlefield for America's soul. And as Trump bellowed, and Jasmine stood unshaken, the question reverberated like a drumbeat across the nation. When the mob boss storms the fight, can justice still prevail, or will the truth be silenced beneath his roar? The roar of the chamber still hadn't faded when Jasmine Crockett moved. Calm, deliberate, she reached for the remote in her hand. The tension rippled instantly. Reporters leaned forward, lenses snapping. Giuliani squirmed in his chair. Trump bellowed insults no one could hear over the pounding anticipation. And then, with a single click, the screens behind her lit up in blinding white before flooding with black text. It wasn't one document, it was hundreds. A timeline stretching across the screen, every lie, every contradiction, every false promise, each entry dated, sourced, stamped. November 5, 2020. Giuliani claims ballots were trucked in by the thousands. November 12, court ruling. No evidence provided. December 2, Hannity amplifies fraud claims. December 14, another lawsuit dismissed, line after line. A cascade of deception projected 30 feet high. The room gasped, the whispers swelling into a tidal wave. She pressed another button, and the timeline shifted. Now came the money. Logos of oil and gas giants splashed across the screen, followed by dollar figures that made jaws drop. Over $41 million in advertising revenue funneled directly into Fox News during the election coverage, Jasmine declared, her voice steady but laced with fire. Every time Hannity shouted fraud, Every time Giuliani swore a false oath, these corporations paid to keep the lights on. The numbers pulsed on screen like blood-red warnings. Audience members shifted in their seats, some covering their mouths in disbelief, others nodding with fury. She wasn't finished. Another click, and the screen filled with text messages, internal Fox correspondence, stripped from Discovery in the Dominion case. The words were damning, undeniable. This is insane, but it's what the audience wants. We all know Rudy has nothing. Just play along. Ratings are everything. The chamber exploded. Protesters outside screamed louder, their chants rattling the windows. Giuliani shook his head violently, muttering denials no one heard. Hannity's face drained of color, his empire of bravado crumbling under the glow of his own words. Jasmine's voice cut through the storm. This is not freedom of speech, this is fraud sold as patriotism. This is the auctioning of truth for ratings and profit. And every American who believed them paid the price, in trust, in division, in a democracy pushed to the brink. She raised her hand toward the screen, the timeline of lies glowing behind her like a wall of crime scene photos. This, she paused, letting the silence burn, is the wall they built. Not to protect America, but to trap it in darkness. The gallery erupted. Some people leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting, while others hurled insults and demands to adjourn the hearing. The clash was thunderous, deafening, a portrait of the nation itself, fractured, enraged, searching for truth. The camera zoomed in on Jasmine's face, unwavering, carved in resolve. And then, with the entire country leaning in, she delivered the words that seared into history. So tell me, America, how many lies does it take before a nation finally says enough? The evidence wall still glowed behind Jasmine, a towering mural of deception. The chamber had not yet recovered from the shock when she pivoted sharply, fixing her eyes on Sean Hannity. Her voice cut through the noise with surgical clarity. Mr. Hannity, I will ask you simple questions. You will answer only yes or no. Do you understand? The camera zoomed tight. Hannity shifted in his chair, adjusting his tie, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Congresswoman, this isn't a courtroom. I'm not. Jasmine slammed her palm on the desk, the sound cracking like a gunshot. Yes or no, she demanded. The gallery gasped. Giuliani jerked in his seat. Even Trump paused mid-rant, eyes narrowing. Her first strike came swift. Did you know the claims of widespread voter fraud were false? Hannity leaned forward, smirk faltering. I reported what was being said. Jasmine's voice sliced through. Yes or no? He stammered, eyes darting to Jordan and Green, but they were powerless to save him. People had concerns. Jasmine barked again, louder this time, each word a hammer. Yes or no? The screen behind her flickered, displaying an internal Fox message. Hannity privately admits he's seen no evidence. Gasps tore through the room. Hannity's lips moved, but no words emerged. She pressed harder. Second question, did you profit from continuing to push these lies? Yes or no? His face flushed, sweat beading at his temples. That's not fair. Jasmine's voice roared like thunder. Yes or nitrogen monoxide? The screen shifted again, this time showing revenue charts. Fox News raking in tens of millions in ad dollars from oil and pharmaceutical giants during election coverage. The chamber buzzed like a hive. Hannity froze, then came the final blow. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper sharp enough to pierce steel. Did you betray the trust of the American people you swore to inform? Yes or no? The silence was suffocating. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Each heartbeat felt like a hammer striking marble. 3 seconds stretched into 3 years, the weight of betrayal hanging in the chamber, pressing down on Hannity's shoulders, crushing the empire he built. The cameras captured his face, pale, trembling, eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. Jasmine straightened, letting the silence itself become the answer. The audience erupted, half shouting in fury, half cheering with vindication. Giuliani covered his mouth with his hand, as though shielding himself from the collapse. Trump snarled something incoherent, but even his voice couldn't erase what America had just witnessed. Sean Hannity, cornered, silenced by his own complicity. Jasmine's voice rose above the storm, steady and merciless. 3 seconds of silence. 3 seconds that spoke louder than every broadcast, every lie, every dollar earned on the backs of deception. America heard your answer, Mr. Hannity. Her eyes burned into the camera lens, a message not to him but to the millions watching. In silence, was guilt finally confessed, and will this nation have the courage to act on it? The silence of Hannity's non-answer still lingered when Jasmine struck again, sharper, louder, relentless. She raised her voice so the whole chamber, and the millions watching across America, would hear. This was never about democracy for you. This was about ratings. Every night you fed America poison because fear sells. You sold lies like they were commercials, and the only thing you cared about was keeping your empire alive one Nielsen point at a time. Her words cracked through the chamber, each syllable laced with contempt. The screens behind her flickered again, this time showing graphs in red and blue. The spikes told the story better than any speech. Whenever Hannity shouted fraud, ratings soared. Whenever he admitted doubt, numbers dipped. Jasmine stabbed her finger toward the screen. Every surge in these lines is another lie that left families broken, friendships destroyed, and this nation pushed closer to collapse. Tell me, Mr. Hannity, how much is truth worth to you? Less than a quarter hour of ad revenue. The question hung heavy, like a guillotine, over his head. Hannity exploded, his face red with rage, his fist pounding the desk so hard the mic rattled. You are nothing but a puppet, a mouthpiece for radicals who want to silence us. You wouldn't even exist without networks like mine putting your name in lights. You stand here pretending to be the voice of the people, but you are nothing. Nothing. His voice cracked, desperation leaking through the anger. The chamber convulsed, half the gallery erupted in applause and cheers, fists pumping the air, echoing Hannity's defiance. The other half screamed in fury, doing so loudly the gavel hammered desperately to restore order. Protesters outside picked up the roar, their chants splitting into dueling waves, one side shouting Crockett, Crockett, while the other thundered USA, USA. America itself seemed divided down the center line of that chamber. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned into her microphone, her voice steady, her eyes fixed like a sniper's scope. A puppet, she repeated, her tone dripping with scorn. I answer to no one but the people who sent me here. You answer to ratings, you answer to advertisers. You answer to the shadow of a man who taught you to profit from division. She lifted a page of advertising contracts tied to Fox, her hand trembling not from fear but from fury. All companies, drug companies, billionaires, these are your masters. And every time you told America another lie, their pockets got fatter, while families out there chose between rent and medicine. The words cracked the chamber wide open. The cameras panned the audience, faces twisted in anger, others wet with tears, some screaming, some stunned into silence. Giuliani slumped lower in his chair, while Trump snarled, his knuckles white on the edge of the desk. Hannity tried to speak, but nothing rose above the roar of the room. Jasmine's voice cut through the storm one final time, calm, merciless, unshakable. So I ask you, America, if truth becomes just another commodity to be bought and sold, who pays the ultimate price? Because it isn't Hannity, it isn't Giuliani. It isn't Trump, it's you, and you've been paying for far too long. The chamber was already a storm when Donald Trump erupted again, louder than gavel strikes, louder than chants bleeding in from outside. He ripped the microphone from its stand, his voice booming like a siren. Jasmine Crockett is a traitor, he bellowed, jabbing his finger across the chamber. She doesn't love this country, she wants to tear it apart, to hand it over to radicals, to destroy everything we built. His face glowed red, his fist slamming the podium. The fury wasn't just anger, it was desperation, the howl of a man who felt control slipping through his fingers. The words echoed like a gunshot, ricocheting through the marble chamber. His supporters in the gallery screamed in approval, fists pumping, voices chanting traitor. Traitor, others shouted back in outrage, their cries of shame colliding in the air like crashing waves. The sound was deafening, chaotic, as though the chamber itself were cracking under the pressure. Giuliani shrank further into his seat, his eyes darting wildly, as if searching for a door that didn't exist. Hannity clenched his jaw, his empire visibly crumbling in real time. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett stood motionless. Her hand rested on the binder, her back straight, her eyes locked on Trump's raging figure. She did not flinch, did not raise her voice to compete with his storm. Instead, she leaned slowly into her microphone, her calmness slicing sharper than any scream. "You call me a traitor," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the cacophony like a blade through fog. "But your lies, Mr. Trump. Your lies are the real betrayal. Not of me, not of this chamber, but of every American who still believes this flag stands for truth." The room froze. For a moment, the fury collapsed under the weight of her words. The camera zoomed in on her face, not trembling with anger, not cracked with fear, but steady, resolute, eyes burning with conviction. The silence stretched, and in that silence came something the cameras captured but no script could have written. A woman in the gallery wiping tears from her cheeks. Another protester outside, visible through the glass, pressed a hand to her heart, mouthing Crockett's words. For them, her calm wasn't weakness, it was the courage they'd been waiting to see. Trump roared again, shouting over her, but the echo didn't land the same way. His voice sounded hollow now, frantic, like a man drowning in his own fury. "She's the enemy. She's the disgrace. She's nothing." His words hit the air, but bounced off Jasmine's composure. She stood like stone, her calm absorbing his rage, her conviction steady against his chaos. The chamber vibrated with tension. Half the room seethed with rage, half sat stunned in awe. The split screen played out not just on the broadcast but in the nation's living rooms, chaos on one side, conviction on the other. And as the gavel slammed in vain to restore order, one question thundered louder than the noise, searing itself into history: can calm conviction outlast chaos, and prove stronger than the storm of lies threatening to drown a nation? The chamber was still trembling from Trump's fury when Jasmine Crockett rose again, binder in hand. Her steps were slow, deliberate, like a soldier advancing toward the battlefield's final line. She raised her eyes to the cameras, then to the restless crowd beyond the glass. Her voice didn't roar, it cut clean, sharp as steel. "You can call me anything you want, but you can't argue with numbers." With a click of the remote, the screens behind her thundered to life. The first number appeared, blazing in red across the wall. 89, the chamber gasped. 89 documented lies, she declared, her tone unyielding. From this man, she pointed at Giuliani, and his allies. 89 times they told America a story they knew was false. 89 strikes against truth itself. The screen shook with each word, the font vibrating as though the walls themselves couldn't contain the weight of the count. Before the murmurs could die, the screen shifted. $787,500,000, the digits glowed like fire, consuming the chamber with their enormity. $787.5 million, Jasmine said slowly, each syllable landing like a gavel. That is the price of their lies, that is what it cost to silence a truth that should never have been buried. That is not freedom, that is fraud with a receipt. The room erupted. Some shouted in disbelief, others cheered wildly, reporters scribbling as the number burned into America's memory. She raised her hand, demanding silence, but we are not done. The screens rumbled again, shifting to the next figure, 62. The chamber fell quiet, as if bracing for the strike. 62 lawsuits. 62 chances to prove their claims. 62 failures. Every single court, Republican, Democrat, state, federal, all rejected their lies. 62 defeats, and still they stood before cameras, pretending they had won. That is not courage, that is contempt. The crowd in the gallery leapt to their feet, some clapping, some shouting, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Protesters outside roared louder, their chants pulsing through the walls like drums of war. Giuliani pressed his lips into a thin line, his eyes darting between the screens and the floor as though wishing it would swallow him whole. Trump's jaw tightened, his knuckles white on the microphone, but even he couldn't drown out the avalanche of numbers crashing over him. Jasmine let the roar swell, then raised her hand again. Silence fell, brittle and sharp. 89 lies. $787 million. 62 failures. This is not partisan. This is not political theater. This is mathematics written in blood and betrayal. Numbers do not bend. Numbers do not break. Numbers do not lie. Her voice dropped into a whisper, heavy with finality, her eyes burning into the cameras as though addressing every living room in America. But the question is, will America listen? The numbers still blazed across the giant screens when another voice pierced the chamber. Elizabeth Warren leaned forward, her glasses glinting under the harsh lights, a thick stack of financial records in her hands. "Follow the money," she thundered, her Boston cadence slicing clean. Fox didn't just lie, they monetized those lies. Here, she lifted the pages high, tens of millions funneled from oil conglomerates, drug corporations, and billionaires who had everything to gain from destabilizing democracy. The documents projected onto the wall, rows of transactions, campaign contributions, shadow PACs. Each figure another nail hammered into the empire's coffin. Gasps rippled like shockwaves. Hannity shifted violently in his chair. Giuliani wiped his forehead. Trump scowled, silent for the first time all evening. Before the room could exhale, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez slammed her hand on the desk, her voice igniting like a match to gasoline. "This is weaponized disinformation," she shouted, her eyes blazing. "They didn't just lie, they built an arsenal of deceit and fired it at the American people for profit. They turned democracy into a marketplace and sold it to the highest bidder." Her words shot like arrows, and the crowd split into a frenzy. Half the gallery roared in agreement, rising to their feet, while the other half shouted back in anger. Protesters outside grew louder, chants shaking the glass like thunder rolling in waves. Jasmine stood at the center, her allies rising one by one behind her. Women from across the Democratic caucus moved into frame: Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, Katie Porter, Pramila Jayapal. Their presence was silent at first, but their stance spoke volumes. It was not just Jasmine against Giuliani, Hannity, and Trump anymore. It was a wall of women, resolute, unyielding, carrying the weight of generations silenced, dismissed, ridiculed. The cameras drank in the image, a tableau of unity, fire, and defiance. Warren's voice rose again, pointing directly at Giuliani. "You built a legal career on the ashes of 9/11s, and now we see the invoices of betrayal. Oil, gas, pharma. Every dollar you took was a dollar stolen from truth, from democracy, from the people." Her hand slammed the table, "And America is done paying your price." The uproar was electric. Some in the chamber screamed at Warren to sit down. Jordan and Green tried to shout over AOC, but their words were drowned out by the wave of cheers surging through the audience. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was theater. It was war. It was history being carved live on national television. The camera panned to Jasmine, still steady at the center, her binder open, the wall of numbers behind her, and now her allies at her back. The contrast was undeniable: chaos and fury on one side, community on the other. A tear rolled down the cheek of a woman in the gallery, whispering. Finally, protesters outside began chanting a single phrase, carried by thousands of voices: "Truth will rise, truth will rise." And as the chant grew, the broadcast captured the most searing image of the night: Jasmine Crockett flanked by her sisters in arms, the embodiment of resistance against an empire of deception. Her voice rang out one final time, clear as a bell over the storm: "When women rise, can the empire of lies stand tall? Or will it collapse under the weight of truth?" The chamber was still vibrating from the image of women rising behind Jasmine Crockett when Sean Hannity snapped. He shot up from his seat, papers flying in his hands like confetti ripped from desperation. His voice thundered, but it cracked around the edges, a man shouting to drown out his own fear. "You're cherry-picking, you're twisting. Smartmatic will clear all of this, you'll see. Their systems were compromised, and America deserves to know." He waved the documents in the air, pages shaking violently as though even the paper wanted to escape his grip. The camera zoomed in, his hand trembled, his jaw tight. Sweat gathered on his brow as he tried to glare into the lights, into the lens, into Jasmine herself. "Dominion wasn't the whole story," he shouted. "There's more. Much more. And if you silence me, you silence millions who have the right to hear the truth." His words ricocheted through the marble chamber, clashing with chants outside, a soundscape of a country tearing itself in two. But Jasmine didn't rise to meet his frenzy. She leaned back in her chair, calm, composed, her voice carrying like a blade across the nose. "Smartmatic," she said slowly, letting the name hang in the air. She reached for her binder, flipping it open with deliberate precision. "That's not your salvation, Mr. Hannity. That's your tombstone. Do you know how much that lawsuit is worth? $2.7 billion, that's the cost of your next lie. A number so big it makes Dominion look like pocket change." The chamber gasped, The cameras caught Hannity's face as the words landed. His eyes widened, the cornered look of a man realizing the floor beneath him was collapsing. He grabbed his water bottle with a shaking hand, unscrewing the cap with fumbling fingers. He gulped it down, his Adam's apple bobbing wildly, but the water did nothing to wash away the panic crawling across his features. The camera zoomed tighter, capturing the sweat glistening on his temple, the tremor in his lips. Jasmine pressed on, voice relentless, merciless. You profited off lies. You mocked your viewers behind closed doors. You cashed the checks, fueled by fear, and told yourself it was freedom. But this is what freedom looks like when you weaponize it, a $2.7 billion bill and a legacy that will crumble the second you can no longer hide behind the teleprompter. She lifted the binder high, slamming it shut with a crack that echoed through the chamber. You don't hold the wheel anymore, Mr. Hannity. You lost it the moment you sold truth for ratings. The chamber erupted. Half the gallery cheered, clapping furiously, stomping their feet. The other half screamed in anger, their voices colliding in chaos. Giuliani buried his face in his hands. Trump slammed the desk, roaring something incoherent. Hannity tried to speak, but no sound came, only the tremble of his lips as the cameras broadcast his collapse live to the nation. And then Jasmine turned to the lens, her eyes unyielding, her voice low and sharp. What happens, she asked, each word cutting through the roar, when the master of spin finally loses control of the wheel? The chamber had descended into chaos, Hannity trembling, Giuliani shrinking, Trump seething. And then Jasmine Crockett stood, remote in hand, her eyes hard as steel. Enough talk, she said, her voice low but cutting through the uproar like a blade. Let America see for itself. She pressed the button. The screens behind her flickered, then burst alive with a reel of damning footage. For 21 seconds, Fox News anchors filled the chamber, their voices echoing with certainty. The election was stolen. Millions of fraudulent ballots. The system is rigged. The clips cut fast, sharp, one after another, the familiar faces of primetime hosts shouting into cameras with righteous indignation. The sound was loud, angry, orchestrated, until it wasn't. The video shifted, the same voices, but in private. Text messages, emails, internal chat logs flashed on screen, read aloud in monotone over the footage. We have no evidence, this is insane, but the audience expects it. We all know Rudy has nothing. The montage spliced the on-air lies with the off-air confessions, lie and truth colliding in brutal clarity. Hannity's face, bold on screen shouting fraud, cut to his own message. I don't believe any of this. And then the screen went black. The silence that followed was unbearable. Not a word, not a cough, not the scrape of a chair. Just 21 seconds of dead air inside a chamber filled with the most powerful voices in America. 21 seconds that stretched into eternity, every heartbeat amplified, every glance frozen. Giuliani stared at the table, his lips pressed into a trembling line. Hannity gripped his pen until it snapped between his fingers. Trump's face flushed red, his jaw opening, but even he found no words to fill the void. The camera zoomed in on Jasmine. She stood motionless, her hands at her sides, letting the silence roar louder than any speech. The nation leaned in, millions glued to their screens, feeling the weight of truth crash down, not in shouting, not in slogans, but in absence. The silence itself became a verdict. A woman in the gallery raised her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Another spectator whispered. Finally, outside, the crowd stilled for a moment, their chests faltering as if they too could feel the gravity of what had just been revealed. 21 seconds, not long in the measure of time, but long enough to break illusions that had stood for years. At last, Jasmine stepped forward, her voice steady, deliberate, each word measured like a judge pronouncing sentence. This is the cost of lies. 21 seconds where not one of you could answer for them. 21 seconds where truth stood alone, unchallenged, undeniable. She turned toward the cameras, her eyes burning straight into the lens, into every living room across America. So I ask you, was this the sound of silence, or was this the sound of truth breaking through? The silence of the montage still lingered, hanging like smoke after an explosion. Then it cracked. A man in uniform, a veteran with silver hair and trembling hands, stood from the gallery. His chest heaved, his lips quivered, and before anyone could stop him, tears streamed down his face. I fought for this flag, he shouted, his voice raw, echoing through the chamber. "I bled for it. And you," he pointed toward Giuliani, toward Hannity, toward Trump. "You lied to us all." His cry split the air like lightning. The room erupted. A group of black spectators, seated together along the back rows, rose to their feet, fists clenched high. Their voices thundered in unison, shaking the chamber with a single word: "Justice, justice, justice." It wasn't a chant, it was a demand, a primal roar rising from decades of betrayal and broken promises. The cameras swung wildly, capturing the scene. Veterans weeping, mothers screaming, protesters pounding on the glass walls, the sound swelling into a storm no gavel could tame. Trump surged forward, his hand lunging for the microphone. His face burned crimson, his voice already rising. "This is a sham. They're staging a riot in my courtroom. Let me speak. Let me." But before his fingers touched the steel, the chair gavel cracked 3 times, harder, louder, commanding order. Security stepped in, holding the line, and for the first time in his life, Donald J. Trump was pushed back from the microphone. His roar turned into a snarl, his fury visible but caged. The cameras caught it all. The former president silenced not by political rivals, but by the will of the people flooding the chamber. Jasmine Crockett stood in the center of the maelstrom, her face calm, but her eyes shimmering with something more powerful than anger, resolve. She let the people have their moment, their voices rising higher than any politician's speech. Her hand rested gently on the binder before her, but she didn't lift it. Not yet. Today wasn't just about documents, numbers, or lawsuits. Today was about truth piercing through years of no's. And for the first time, it wasn't her words alone carrying the battle, it was the chorus of ordinary Americans. Giuliani sat frozen, his mouth half open, unable to respond. Hannity bowed his head, his knuckles white as he clutched broken papers. The empire of deception was crumbling not from cross-examination or subpoenas, but from the raw eruption of human pain now too loud to ignore. The gavel pounded again, but it was drowned out by the chant swelling into a roar, as if the marble itself vibrated with the sound of justice being summoned. The cameras captured the faces, the veteran wiping his tears, the young woman shouting until her voice cracked, the crowd outside pressing against barriers with fists raised high. And through it all, Jasmine's voice finally rose above the din, steady, clear, sharp as a bell. "This is America speaking, and when the people see the truth, can power still silence them?" The roar of justice still thundered in the chamber when Jasmine Crockett rose to her full height. The crowd hadn't settled. Trump's face was still twisted in fury, Hannity was still trembling, and Giuliani slumped in silence. Yet, in the middle of the storm, she stood calm, her hand resting on the binder that had become both shield and sword. She didn't raise her voice at first, she let the silence beg for her words. Then she struck. Freedom of speech is sacred, she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of centuries. The room quieted as if dragged into orbit around her. But free speech is not a license to sell lies, it is not a weapon to poison democracy. It is not a game to be played for ratings while families break apart, while veterans cry, while children grow up in a nation where truth is just another commodity. Her words cut like thunderbolts. She stepped away from the desk, binder in hand, pacing slowly as every eye followed her. "You called yourselves patriots, but patriots don't profit off betrayal. You called yourselves journalists, but journalists don't laugh at their viewers behind closed doors. You called yourselves leaders, but leaders do not burn the house down and sell tickets to watch it burn." She lifted her head, her eyes blazing, and stabbed the air with her finger toward Trump, Hannity, Giuliani. "You betrayed the very people who trusted you, and you thought no one would hold you accountable." The chamber trembled. Some in the gallery shouted her name, others wept openly, overcome by the weight of the moment. Giuliani clutched the table, ashen. Hannity's lips trembled, his hand twitching around a shattered pen. Trump's fists pounded the desk, but even he couldn't drown her out. Jasmine's voice rose now, louder, carried by fire. "This is not about party. This is not about left or right. This is about truth versus lies, democracy versus deception, the soul of America versus the empire of greed. And every number I've shown you, every dollar, every lawsuit, every documented lie, is proof that they sold this country piece by piece, until the truth was nothing but an inconvenience." The audience surged again, half shouting in rage, half in rapturous applause. Protesters outside pounded the barricades, their chants shaking the glass. Cameras zoomed in, capturing tears on the cheeks of young students, the clenched jaws of veterans, the raw emotion carved into the faces of ordinary citizens who had lived the consequences of deception. Jasmine raised the binder high above her head, then slammed it shut with a crack that reverberated through the marble chamber. The sound silenced everything. The cheers, the jeers, the chants. She leaned into the microphone, her voice a whisper that struck harder than any scream. Mark this day. Mark this hour. Because one truth has burned brighter than every lie they tried to sell. Free speech is not a license to sell lies. It never was. It never will be. The room detonated. Applause, shouts, chants of her name. The cameras pulled back, capturing the seismic image of Jasmine Crockett standing firm against the collapsing empire of deception. And as the echoes raged beyond the chamber, her words lingered like an unshakable verdict. Will this moment echo beyond these walls, or will America let it fade into silence? The echo of Jasmine Crockett's words was still shaking the marble chamber when America's airwaves detonated. CNN broke in with an emergency chyron in blazing red. Crockett confronts Trump. Hannity, Giuliani -21s of silence stunned nation. MSNBC followed within seconds, anchors nearly breathless as they replayed the montage over and over, their voices tinged with awe. Twitter caught fire, servers groaning under the weight of millions typing the same phrase. Within minutes, #JusticeTo1S trended at #1 worldwide, a digital eruption that no empire could contain. Clips of the veterans' tears, the chants of justice from the gallery, and Hannity's trembling silence spread like wildfire across TikTok and Instagram. The 21-second blackout became a rallying cry, looped and remixed into protest videos, set to music, turned into memes that carried a sharper sting than any editorial. College campuses lit up with students projecting Jasmine's words onto dormitory walls. Free speech is not a license to sell lies. That not everyone could bear to watch. Inside Fox News headquarters, panic bold. Producers scramble as their live broadcast suddenly cut to commercial mid-sentence, the screen fading to an awkward silence. Viewers at home blinked in confusion, then fury. Phones rang off the hook. Hashtags flipped from #JusticeTo1S to #FoxSilenced. Critics accusing the network of censoring its own collapse. Anchors who once commanded prime time looked cornered, their eyes darting nervously. Their scripts were written on the fly to bury the moment that millions had already seen. Across America, the divide deepened, but the tremor was undeniable. In diners and barber shops, on factory floors and subway cars, people replayed the clip on their phones, staring in disbelief as the most powerful media machine in the country was exposed live, not by rivals, not by courts, but by its own words. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was betrayal. For all, it was unforgettable. The headlines screamed, the hashtags surged, the nation seethed. And as the frenzy spread like fire through the wires of a fractured democracy, one question burned brighter than the rest: can an empire survive when its foundation is exposed? While the nation erupted outside, behind locked doors the Republican leadership huddled in silence. Phones buzzed, voices whispered, tempers boiled. Trump loomed at the center of the room, his voice rising to a growl that carried like thunder. "You stay with me," he barked, stabbing a finger into the table. "Anyone who breaks ranks will be finished. I'll bury you in primaries. I'll destroy your careers. You're either loyal to me or you're the enemy." His words weren't persuasion. They were threats, sharp and undeniable, echoing across the marble walls like the crack of a whip. Elsewhere, Hannity paced inside his office, the blinds drawn tight. His hands shook as he dialed his lawyer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me they can't take everything," he pleaded, his tone stripped of the bravado that once commanded millions. "Tell me this lawsuit won't ruin me." The once confident anchor now looked like a man cornered, sweating under the weight of his empire collapsing piece by piece. And in a different corner of Washington, Jasmine Crockett sat at her desk, the glow of a single lamp illuminating stacks of letters and emails. Some were messages of gratitude, handwritten notes from veterans, single mothers, young students thanking her for daring to speak truth to power. The others were darker, anonymous threats, crude words scrawled across envelopes, voicemails promising retribution. One note ended with four chilling words: "You will be silenced." She read it, folded it, set it aside, and kept writing her speech for tomorrow. For every threat, her resolve grew sharper. For every warning, her determination burned brighter. She knew the cost of truth was high, but she had seen higher costs paid by the people she represented. Families evicted, children hungry, veterans abandoned. She would not be the one to flinch now. The power brokers plotted, the empire trembled, the shadows hissed their threats. And still, one woman stood tall, daring to face them all. The question now was not whether she would endure, but at what cost. What price must a truth-teller pay? The threats piled high on Jasmine's desk, but so did something else: letters. Dozens became hundreds, hundreds became thousands, flooding her office in Washington. Crumpled envelopes, postcards from small towns, carefully written notes from children. Each carried the same message: we believe you. Keep fighting. One came from a coal miner in West Virginia, another from a teacher in Detroit, another from a grandmother in Arizona who wrote simply, I never trusted politics, but I trust you. News cameras panned across vigils sprinting up in cities across America. In Baltimore, candles lined church steps. In Houston, murals appeared overnight, Jasmine's face painted high on brick walls with the words, Truth will rise. In Chicago, chants echoed through subway tunnels, Crockett. Justice, Crockett. Justice. These weren't orchestrated rallies. They were spontaneous eruptions, the raw voice of a people hungry for honesty. For communities long ignored, Jasmine became more than a politician. She became proof that someone who carried their pain into Congress could strike at the heart of power. Latino families marched with signs reading, Nuestra Voz. Asian American students projected her speech across dormitory walls. And in living rooms across the South, mothers gathered their children and pointed to Jasmine on TV, whispering, this is what courage looks like. The most powerful image came one evening on national television. A panel of black mothers sat in a row, their voices steady but trembling with emotion. One leaned into the camera, tears streaking her face. We've buried our sons, we've seen our daughters ignored. But today, Jasmine Crockett stood for us. She said what we've been screaming into the void for years. She showed them we are not invisible. The anchor tried to interrupt, but the studio audience rose to its feet, applauding through tears. Across America, the shift was undeniable. This was no longer one woman holding a binder of evidence. This was a movement swelling beyond marble walls and courtroom doors. And the question on every lip was searing. Has Jasmine become more than just a politician? Has she become a movement? The chamber, once a theater of screams and silence, now braced for a single moment. The chair lifted the gavel, her voice grave. The question before this committee is whether to open a full ethics investigation into the conduct of Mr. Giuliani and the involvement of Mr. Hannity and Mr. Trump. The words landed like thunder. Every camera light flared, every spectator leaned forward. One by one, the roll call began, names called, votes cast. A. No. A. Each answer struck like a drumbeat, echoing through the chamber, the rhythm of history in motion. Jasmine sat still, her binder closed but her eyes locked forward, knowing she had already fought her part of the battle. Now it was up to the institution to choose, accountability or complicity. The tally grew, the margin widened, the suspense tightened every chest in the room. Then, at last, the verdict was announced. By majority vote, this committee will open an ethics investigation. The chamber exploded. Gasps, shouts, cheers. Some pounded their desks in fury, others clapped until their palms reddened. The cameras caught everything. Hannity's head bowing low, his once defiant posture collapsing into resignation. Giuliani slumped as if gravity itself had doubled, his face gray, his lips moving but producing no words. And Trump erupted, fists slamming the desk, his roar shaking the air. This is treason. This is a disgrace. His voice cracked, but his fury only amplified the moment. A picture of power unraveling live on national television. Jasmine did not move, her silence more powerful than any response. Around her, the chamber shook with history being made, with justice inching closer to the men who thought they were untouchable. And as the gavel struck to close the session, the question thundered beyond the marble walls, will justice be served, or delayed once more? The marble chamber faded behind her. Jasmine Crockett returned to her district, where the cameras were fewer but the stakes felt heavier. She walked through church basements filled with folding chairs and the smell of coffee, through crowded clinics where mothers clutched prescriptions they couldn't afford to fill, through job fairs where men in worn boots carried resumes that had already been rejected a dozen times. Everywhere she went, people reached for her hands, thanking her for speaking truth to power. But their eyes told another story, weary, anxious, carrying burdens that no committee vote in Washington could erase. A grandmother whispered, "My insulin costs more than my rent." A young father asked, "Where are the jobs that pay enough to live?" A student with tears in her eyes said, "How do we believe in democracy when our voices still go unheard?" Each question struck harder than any insult Trump had hurled. At a town hall, the room packed wall to wall, Jasmine stood not as the fiery voice of Congress, but as a neighbor. "I fought them in Washington," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "But the real fight is here, in our homes, in our paychecks, in our hospitals. Because truth in Congress means nothing if it doesn't heal the pain in our communities." The room rose with applause, but also with tears, a chorus of hope and heartbreak interwoven. The camera zoomed in on her face, no longer framed by marble columns, but by the weary strength of her people. And in that quiet, burning moment, one question lingered, heavier than all the rest. What does victory mean if people are still hurting? The chamber lights dim, the crowd still buzzing, cameras still rolling. Jasmine Crockett rose one last time, binder closed at her side. The chaos, the shouting, the threats, all of it seemed to collapse into a fragile stillness as she stepped toward the microphone. Her eyes swept across the room, then beyond the lens, as if speaking directly to every living room in America. "Truth," she began, her voice low but resonant, "is fragile, but so is glass. Once broken, it cuts deep. And the cuts don't just scar the guilty, they scar the people, the families, the democracy that trusted us to protect it. We cannot mend America with lies, we cannot heal with deception. We cannot rebuild on foundations of greed." Her voice grew stronger, rising with every sentence. "This fight was never about me, it was about the veterans who bled for this country, the mothers who bury their children, the workers who give everything and get nothing back. It was about every person who has been told, 'It don't matter,' and proving that they do." The chamber trembled with the sound of applause rising like a wave, but Jasmine pressed on, her words cutting above it. "History will not remember the shouting, it will not remember the threats. It will remember whether we had the courage to tell the truth when lies were easier. And today, I stand before you to say, America will not be mended by silence, it will be saved by justice." The cameras slowly pulled back, fading into the roar of the gallery as voices rose together. "Justice. Justice, justice," the sound swelled, echoing like thunder long after the image faded to black. And as the screen cut to darkness, Jasmine's final words lingered like a challenge, a whisper, a spark. "Do you believe one voice can still change a nation?" Jasmine Crockett's fight shows us that truth, though fragile, becomes unstoppable when defended with courage. Lies can dominate for a time, but justice echoes far longer. In our own lives, we are all called to be guardians of honesty at work, at home, and in our communities. Standing for truth is never easy, but silence only empowers deception. Together, we can build a nation, a world, where integrity is stronger than fear. If you believe in that fight, tap like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe because every voice, including yours, matters in shaping tomorrow. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.